they're gonna be sorry they were ever born.
Who?
All of them.
It's about to get real dangerous. It's about to get real dangerous. Yeah, watch out, pop out, black out, pop out, beat 'em up, knock out. I had to see with it. I had to come for their head and come for their necks at the same time.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of Cross Coast Rhythms. I'm your co-host, Tevin Brown.
And I'm the other co-host, Anthony Romero.
And with this podcast, we're really kind of focusing on a lot of different things. It's a lot more casual and more conversation-based, but I felt like in the beginning a good focus would be albums that kind of shaped each of us. Some backstory: I was born in New York, raised in Florida, so I'm a very heavy East Coast kid.
I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so not truly West Coast, but I like to consider myself West Coast. I like to think of us as a mini California. I'd say we have a lot of the same culture here. So
if you're close enough, you're like 2 states away.
Yeah, not too far.
But yeah, kind of really focus in the beginning on just albums that really shaped each of us. Kind of going into them for the first couple episodes, focusing on one or two, and then also kind of getting into like major music news and kind of different artists that we feel like should be focused on, or things that are getting added to our rotation and stuff. But to go ahead and get started, we're going to go ahead and start with albums that really shaped us. Now, these are in no particular order of, like, this is the biggest album that ever shaped me, or maybe it even is, and then we kind of clarify that. But it's just kind of like, as we go along, just explaining different albums and different points in our lives that were really important. And I know Tony made a ton of notes for his album, so I'll let him go ahead first.
So I did focus solely on one album, but I will mention others. So I'll just mention the first ones first, and then the one that shaped me the most, I would say Acid Rap by Chance. That was a big album for me growing up, you know, and somebody I have to thank for is my sister, your fiance. She really put me into just like the hip hop world, you know, because I grew up with like early ages. I grew up with like rock and knowing only like heavy metal, and then radio. Like I didn't have no like little iPod shuffle or anything until probably till I was about 9 or 10. But the only things I would have downloaded on that is the only closest thing to hip hop would be "Just a Friend" by Biz Markie.
Great song.
Classic. But Acid Rap was really big. One of my favorite songs by Chance, just in general, was Angels. Another album I would say would be 2014 Forest Hills Drive. I've always been a big Cole fan. Love Cole. We support Cole. I would also say Damn, the Damn album by Kendrick Lamar, and Good Kid, Mad City. Even though I would say I was very young whenever those dropped, and I didn't understand them, and I wasn't able to interpret them well, still was catchy. But as I grew older, like those have made big impacts on my lives and how I look at things differently, you know. And I'd say another album that really shaped me is one of the other albums. This is hip hop, actually. Is you can consider it Marshall Mathers LP2.
Oh yeah,
that album was phenomenal. Me personally, I think that's just one of his best albums. It has a great amount of features, honestly, and
it's definitely underrated.
Very underrated. I wish it got more of a push. But the main album I wanted to focus on today was KOD. KOD was one of my first albums that I was introduced to by my sister and by Cole, because like I never was seeking out albums. I would just seek out like who's hot right now. But whenever I first like got my iPhone and like my first iPhone, and I was introduced to like Spotify and SoundCloud like that, my sister, right when KOD dropped, she was like, "You need to listen to this." I remember listening to it in her little Jeep Patriot in like the summer, and it was just a good time in general. 2018, you know, music's popping off. Cole's barely starting his crazy feature run. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl. I mean, I'm doing great. You know. But I think at that age, at like I was 14 at the time, it was a good age to interpret the message of the album. You know, like
Mhm.
KOD having a bunch of name meanings, you know, like kids on drugs, kings overdose, kill our demons. There has so many meanings that you can interpret it that way. But I was wanting to go like song by song on how some of them affected me.
Mhm.
So like Photograph, I feel like online dating has made a huge impact in this dating world, you know, and like how he's saying that it's basically too much for him to handle, saying love today's gone digital and it's messing with my health. I think that's been it's been a huge impact. Not saying that it's a good impact. I'm not saying it's a bad impact. You know, it has its ups and downs. But the next song I would say the cutoff. I hope we get to see Kill Edward again in his this next album, his supposed final album. I don't know why he's saying it's his final album. We're just skipping. It's a boy.
Yeah, I know.
I'm dying to see what that was, but we'll see. We'll see if he'll drop that first. I'm hoping he will. But I like that. I like that side of Cole. I like that persona.
Mhm.
Um, ATM. ATM was a real good song talking about getting money, you know, but that big quote, can't take it when you die, but you can't live without it. Talking about like meaning money, and meaning like money is in the end is useless, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like people should look more deeper into that, including myself. You know, like money is useless. It's not going to be. It depends on are you happy with yourself without that stuff. Like you shouldn't have to depend on money and cheap thrills like that. Um, I would say another song I was really into is Motivate. Um, Motivates like anti-drug message on that is popping a pill and feeling alive, which having to rely on a pill as a solution for emotions can leave you off worse than you were before.
Mhm.
I also love that song because it was at the time that I was like not starting to, but like kind of getting into the NBA scene. Like I was truly like rooting for teams. You know, I'm gonna say I'm an all Philly fan, and I love the Sixers, and that's just I remember like they were doing good. Ben Simmons was actually playing decent. He was actually playing decent. I don't know if that was the Jimmy Butler era though, but either way, like Cole was the finals. Um, he was the finals like theme, you know, in the commercials and all that, and I was like, nice, he's getting the
Yeah.
recognition he deserves. I think that was the year that the Cavs pulled off that 3-1 3-1 lead too in the finals. It was a great year, I'd say. Um, what's another song? Kevin's Heart, Fighting Temptation. I feel like that's a big thing that people need to do, you know. Um, that could pair with Photograph, you know, and just the production of that song, just in general, was phenomenal. And I love the music video, you know, with Kevin Hart. Um, always been a pretty big fan of him, even growing up. Another song I'd say Brackets.
Mhm.
I love how he critiques the American tax system, saying like why doesn't his tax dollars go towards the black community and black kids in general. Um, I think it's powerful how he rips the white portrayal of history, as he states that the kids learn about the heroes with the whitest of skin. One thing about the men that's controlling the pen that write history, they always seem to white out their sins. God, that's such a clean bar. Like he just truly killed that album. And I again, like I think that was such a perfect time at that age to start like receiving those messages to help me form like who I am, because I feel like at that age from like your teenage years, that's like a big time where you find out who you really are and like
Yeah.
how you're learning who you're becoming. Um, this story of his mom in Once an Addict is so heartbreaking. Talking about how part of me dies when I see her like this, referring to her being an alcoholic. That's
Mhm.
I like when rappers get really personal about their personal lives, because sometimes it can relate to you, you know.
Yeah.
And like that's why I was a really big fan of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick's second to last album. It's just whenever they get personal, it makes the song and the artist's music so much better, because you're like, wow, like maybe it takes them off of that pedestal, like they're not just like they're not above everybody. Like they're just like us. They're just humans, you know. Um, what else? What's another song? Friends. That reliance of marijuana, then eventually graduating to powder. I like how he blames politicians for doing nothing impactful for Americans. I feel like that's been a big problem ever since the Reagan days when he when he brought all that in. But I think I love when they send a message like that. It's really important, and it's important for people to seek out messages like that. You know, what am I forgetting? I feel like there's a couple more. Window Pane. Window Pane was killed me. That's one of my favorite songs off the album. Is just that intro. That intro breaks my heart. Of her, that little girl telling her story of how her cousin died.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking, but it almost reminds me about "Sing About Me" of Dying of Thirst. It gives me those vibes. From Kendrick, his hatred on his stepfather is a very strong message too. It breaks my heart that he had to go through that and his mother had to go through all that abuse, you know. But honestly, I think the album shows how you can deal with pain through the entire album. You can see how you can respond well or fall to bad habits. Like, I think the biggest quote in that album is at the end of KOD. He said, it's that like cool voice where it says power, greed, money, Molly, weed, perks, Xannies, lean, fame, but the strongest drug of them all, love. I feel like that's one of the strongest messages that I've ever received in any album, I'd say.
Yeah.
But I would say that's the biggest one that shaped me, I would say. I feel like Perfect Time, I have to thank my sister again for introducing me to KOD, because that was like the spark that just took me through my whole like music journey. You know, I'm a big fan of hip hop. I wasn't too big of a fan of hip hop before, because obviously I didn't listen to anything at the time I wasn't seeking out. But now, like, I have my favorite artists. I have, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Appreciate it.
Like, I love the breakdown, especially kind of diving into KOD, because that was, especially when it came out, it was such a mixed album as far as reviews.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people who either loved it or they really hated it.
Yeah, I got so much hatred.
Yeah, but I agree with it coming out at the right time.
Yeah.
I think it came out at the right time for a lot of people, including myself, because I was fresh out of college, or I was fresh into college when that album came out, and then especially like Once an Addict. Once an Addict, I think, was the song that hit me the hardest on that album, because that was it. While there was differences, it was very similar to my own childhood of my own mom being addicted to drugs until I was about 4. Thankfully, she stopped when I was like decently young, but then it was also like prescriptions and a lot of other issues like into my teens and stuff. And that was around the same time that I was with my stepfather, who at the time, like, we have a great relationship now when we're technically not even related, versus like when I was a kid and like there was a lot of butting heads, and it was just a rough time. So it was always, that song always hit me the hardest, and then just that whole album I kind of held on to. For a hot minute.
Yeah, it did get an unfortunate amount of hate, but then like now, like, I talk to people who I used to talk to when it first came out. They're like, you give it time to simmer. That's the best thing, is like you give them time to simmer, and you're like, this album is genuinely like top 5. Like, it's so good.
Oh yeah. Ooh. Guess it's my turn then. I guess starting out with a few albums that really shaped me. I think the most obvious one would have to be "I'm Ready" from 1993 by Tevin Campbell.
Oh yeah.
Spelled exactly the same, because that's where my name came from. My mom really loved the name Tevin because she was always in love with Tevin Campbell, and then my dad really loved Tyrese Gibson, because prior to him being in the Fast and Furious movies and stuff, he was a huge R&B singer, and he's still even dropping music today and stuff. But he had dropped an album, Tyrese, I think in 1998. So it was right around the time that my mom, like toward the end of 1998 into 1999, my mom had just gotten pregnant, and they were trying to figure out my name and stuff. And my dad really wanted Tyrese, my mom really wanted Tevin, so they both came up with a compromise where they turned on BET, which at the time still played music. Now it doesn't play anything. But my mom agreed to where whoever's music video came on first,
Mhm.
that's what my name would be.
Yeah.
And she was a little worried because like Tevin hadn't dropped an album in a hot minute, and he wasn't. I mean, he was big during the '90s. Like you'll
Mhm.
even hear him in Sister Sister in like the first
Yeah.
season. Like one of my favorite jokes in there is like, I think it's Tamara gets a date with somebody, and then Tia's like, "Damn, girl, like you acting like you got a date with Tevin Campbell." And it's like you'll hear a lot more references of him back then, especially with Goofy Movie. He voiced Powerline.
Classic.
But sure enough, it was like 2-3 songs later, "Can We Talk," which is from the I'm Ready album,
Yep.
came on, and the rest is history.
That song is amazing.
Kind of grateful because I love my dad, but I don't think I'm a Tyrese.
I couldn't see you as a Tyrese. Not at all.
It'd be very interesting to try and imagine myself as Tyrese John Brown.
Yeah. And like honestly, you think like that could change your whole life. Like you just being called a different name. Like you could be a totally different person right
be a
now.
whole different person. I'd probably be such an asshole. Sorry to all the Tyreses out there. Not that y'all are. It's just I think I would be. Some other big albums that kind of shaped my life in different points. I'm Not a Human Being Part 2 from Wayne. Hell, the sequel, Bad Meets Evil, which was Royce the 5'9" and Eminem's album back in like 2011.
Damn.
That one had like Fastlane.
And I'm gonna be honest, Fastlane was amazing, but I mostly remember it from Real Steel.
Same.
Real Steel was like one of my favorite movies. I know like the acting, I hate the kids acting so much, but oh my gosh, I wish there was I'm still waiting for Real Steel 2.
Man. I remember because that was around the time they had made a Real Steel mobile game.
I played that.
Yes, dude. Where you like created your own freaking robot.
That
and,
was
I played the heck out of that one.
That brings me back.
Some other big ones in my life, I think, dating back a little bit, Make Yourself from Incubus. That one was especially integral to kind of my upbringing, especially being raised by my uncle for like heavy pieces of my life. It was like I always remember him working, and I'd forget what he was even working at the time, but we would come home, we would pick up like Chinese food, and we would just listen to Incubus and watch The Labyrinth and all these other movies. And we had the VHS of Spider-Man 1, and I'd watch the shit out of that.
It's such a vibe.
Oh man. Another, I think one of like the most integral albums I think to my entire upbringing, Songs About Jane from Maroon 5. My mom played the shit out of that album, and rightfully so. I mean, her name is Jane, and so like the messaging and like a lot of different things through that album. That's easily Maroon 5's best album.
Yeah,
and I think it hurts when you like get to like later songs where it's like you always enjoy Maroon 5, but it feels like they just like switched gears to pop so heavily, whereas that one was just like it had pop elements, but it was just so focused on its heavy message. And like, I mean, different songs in there. Sunday Morning, it's a beautiful song, but it's also like got hints of pain in it. Or Harder to Breathe, I think ultimately became my favorite. Like initially This Love, because I think that one was so popular from that album. That one was my favorite as a kid. But as I went back and re-listened, I think definitely Harder to Breathe became my favorite song on there, because it's just like when it gets cold outside and you got nobody to love, when it gets cold outside you got nobody to love, you'll understand what I mean when I say there's no way we're gonna give up. Like a little girl hides in a place from a monster who lives in her dreams. If there's anyone out there, it's getting harder and harder to breathe. And it's just a great song overall, and just that whole album definitely had heavy impacts on my life, as like I picked it up myself and just listened through it. And then I think getting into 2013 was the heavy piece, because at that point I had finished 8th grade in Tampa, living at my dad's after a huge fallout between my mom and my stepdad's divorce and everything. And then me and my mom butted heads because I was also going through puberty and I was confused and so many different issues. And so she sent me with my dad. And then I finished 8th grade there at Jennings Middle School. Shout out to Jennings. I remember every week on Thursday, you always knew as soon as that final bell rang somewhere in the school, you kind of figured out as a student like where it was going to be, but there was going to be a fight. And it was like you just see a full lot of students.
You just see a flood, you're like, there it is. That's funny.
But shout out to Jennings. But I finished 8th grade, and then my mom and I had talked, and I decided to move in with her. And at the time, she moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And so I moved all my stuff up to Fayetteville, and I only spent, I think, my first semester of 9th grade there because it was awful living in Fayetteville. I remember we landed in Fayetteville. It was the first day, and we had heard on the news that like a block or two up from our house, our trailer, there was like 3 bodies discovered. And I remember one day walking to my school bus, and someone had stabbed their dog and thrown it on the side of the road. Like Fayetteville's crazy. I understand why he calls it like the Ville and like how tough it is out there. Because damn.
Yeah, they don't play around over there.
And that was especially when I'm Not a Human Being Part 2 came out, and then Magna Carta from Jay-Z. Those 2 albums came out. So those were heavy for me listening in my time in Fayetteville. And then I moved end of 2013 back to Tampa and continued high school over there, which while I was in Fayetteville, I went to Southview High School for a very small time. I was in the IB program.
Yeah.
And I wasn't good at it, not in the sense that I struggled academically. I was just really fucking lazy. That was, I think, the hard part.
Same here.
But it created this weird situation when I moved back to Tampa where my records didn't transfer. And so as far as like the school system recognized, I hadn't gone to school for the first semester of 9th grade.
Fuck that.
So I had to like retake and like do online classes while doing regular high school classes to try and catch up. And it was awful. But it was about a year later, as I'm like deep into sophomore year, going to King and doing the mess that I was doing at King. Shout out to H3. And shout out to everybody from King. I miss those days sometimes. But 2014 Forest Hills Drives had dropped, and I had always known about Cole. I mean, through Friday Night Lights and through Born Center and what's that other one? It was kind of like his first actual like debut album. Because there was like Friday Night Lights and the Warm Up, and there was one between those, or like the Come Up.
I'm trying to think of that album.
Yeah,
man.
But there was like that album that had like Can't Get Enough and all of like a lot more of like his hits and
Sideline Story.
Sideline Story, yes. And so like I had always known about those albums and like really listened and like always vibed with Cole back then. But it was like it felt like it wasn't a lot that I personally connected to until 2014 Forest Hills Drive, and just listening to that whole album and like finding this guy who like grew up in such a hard place, but also at the same time never considered himself hard, because I damn sure did not consider myself hard. I was a small baby face, and up until like I turned 14, they called me Bruno Mars because I was short.
That's so.
Had my little fro. And
I had literally the same thing.
I think
they
it's just internal racism.
That too.
If you're short and brown,
like you're short brown, you got curly hair. You look like Bruno Mars.
But it was, and that began my track. 2014 Forest Hills Drive, For Your Eyes Only, KOD, and KOD. It was shortly after KOD that he kind of introduced me to JID. Or no, I got introduced to Earth Gang before I got introduced to JID. And I had fallen in love with their sound because I was always a huge Outkast kid. Like growing up, Aquemini, Stankonia. What was the other one? The Love Below / I forget what Big Boy's half was called. So it was like listening to Earth Gang. I was like, oh my God. And that was like, at the time of like finding them in 2018, I was like so heavy into just Cole. And I felt myself kind of like, because Wayne wasn't making much anymore. Jay was out. I mean, I wasn't really vibing with Drake albums by that point.
Yeah.
And so it was like I was just listening to like Cole, and I just go back and re-listen to flipping Sideline Story through For Your Eyes Only, and then eventually KOD when that dropped in 2018. And so kind of finding Earth Gang, it was like a breath of fresh air, where it was such an Outkast sound, but so new and modern, and they were just so interesting to me. And so I've always loved their group. And then I think it was the song Meditate that they dropped, and it was them with JID. And like I remember when I first like clicked on the video, because everyone was talking about that song, And I was like, who the fuck is JID? And then I listened to that, and then I really became like, who is
Yeah.
JID?
Mhm.
And then I backtracked to the Never Story and listened to that album.
Yep.
And that album also completely freaking changed my life.
Disgusting.
And that became this whole run for me where I was just deep diving into any and every music that I could.
Mhm.
And it really started the track. And I had started first with Dreamville. And I'd really gotten to know, because I'd always known about Boz and Kaz and Loot and all them, but then I really started diving into all their music, and then I went to TDE and I really started diving into all their music, and then I
Yeah.
went to Shady Records and wanted to dive into their music and Aftermath, and was like just finding all of these artists that I had loved growing up and realizing how many of them had created their own labels and was signing people and like bringing them on, and
Yeah.
really kind of created this deep dive to where even beyond that, then I started listening to Toby Nwigwe and D Smoke and
Mhm.
so many different artists. But I think definitely like, so the biggest artist in my life would have to be J. Cole, just
Mhm.
because of like how much he got me through. And then the biggest album that I think got me through my life would probably be Songs About Jane, Maroon 5, because
Mhm.
that was just really integral to
Mhm.
my entire upbringing and going through like those early childhood development stages.
Yeah. Yeah, we miss Prime Maroon 5. I miss those days.
We missed those days, man. It was such a simpler time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, what's it called? Back to the middle school thing about there's a fight every day. My middle school, James Monroe Middle School, shout out to James Monroe. We had this one thing, I don't know if it was monthly, but we always had fight week. And every day just people would just start throwing hands. And the poor security guard, I think her
Oh
name
my
was Miss
goodness.
Lyon. She was so sweet. She was just this like 4 foot like
Oh, no.
security guard, and she has to break up all these fights every day. And I'm like, y'all, like, can we please chill? Can we please chill?
Oh.
But
Yeah, for us it was crazy, because for us we had so many like just cops just constantly at our school because of us. We were a bad school. I
Us
already
too.
knew it. Like, we were a mess.
yeah, but
Oh man.
yeah, we're it seems we're both big supporters of Dreamville, Dreamville and just J. Cole in general got me through so much from, I would say, ever since KOD dropped to like 2021 or 2022 when he just went on that insane feature run.
Mm-hmm.
Insane. And like out of that, the product of that came out like Water Boys. That was one that really stuck with me. What else? Johnny P's Caddy. I'd say that is one of his best verses of
I
all
agree.
time. Disgusting. I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
That whole Dreamville era where there was Stick. God, I just that whole like, I don't know. It was like
that
it was like a
Judgment Day album.
that whole Judgment Day, that whole like 4 month span. Like that was probably one of my favorite times of being a Cole fan. Is just like he was just any song he got on, he'd kill it.
Yeah.
He'd kill it.
Oh man. Oh snap. Speaking of Cole, I feel like I completely forgot to bring up another huge album to me with an artist, Illmatic, Nas. That album, oh my goodness. Because like I didn't have a car until I was like 20, 21. And anyone who knew me in Florida knew I walked everywhere. And like I didn't care the distance. I'd walk 3 towns over, like in the middle of the night, take like 8 hours, like get home by the time the sun rises.
Damn.
And I'd just sit there like with my headphones, like walking in the rain. It's like you'd be walking in the rain, but it's a crystal clear sky, so you're seeing the stars, and it's like there's no street lights. It's just all woods and swamp around you, just walking down this quiet road. And I just sit there and listen to like Illmatic and so many different albums. And then he had that one album. It was him and Junior Gong, Diddy Marley. Let me see, Nas, Junior Gong, Damien. What am I
Damien.
thinking? Yeah, Diddy is the other one.
Hmm.
But yeah, let me see what this album was called right here. Go to album. Distant Relatives.
Distant Relatives.
That
Okay.
album right there, it was such a mix of, because I always loved Junior Gong. Like he was my favorite of Bob Marley's kids, and it was just this beautiful mix of hip hop and like reggae. That album went off. Oh my goodness! With freaking As We Enter, Tribes at War, Strong Will Continue. Honestly, that one for me next to no skips. Like off the top of my head, no
Wow.
skips for me.
Wow.
Because it was like, oh my goodness. Anyone who hasn't listened to Distant Relatives with Nas and Damian Marley, you need to go listen to it if you're a hip hop head. 'Cause it's- good lord.
Looks like I need to go listen to it.
You need to go. The album right there is like, and it was also like, because they're such intellectual and spiritual type people
Hmm.
that they both just like, you got to listen to their verses 3 or 4 times, and I'm just sitting there
Okay.
like, ugh. But yeah, I think those are like some of the biggest albums that definitely shaped me.
Hmm.
Oh man,
Trying,
yeah.
trying to think of other albums that really shaped me. Man, it's always the best whenever you can think of like a song and it just takes you back to like a certain moment or like
Mhm.
certain environment. Like
Yeah.
I would say I am not the biggest Drake fan, but
Hey man,
whenever
I don't think after the last year, if you are, props to you, because like you are a person who will never succumb to peer pressure.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like I feel like it is the general consensus.
we gonna judge you.
Judge
But during that time, like, Drake just dropped Scorpion, and like
Mm.
I just got my new like beats. That it's a shame they just died like
Oh,
a couple
no.
months ago. I've had those for I don't know how long,
Yeah.
and I freaking wore them to the freaking earmuffs fell off. But man, just listening to those songs and all that, I had like the whole bass turned up, and just I went on walks all the time. Sometimes whenever I missed the bus going to school, I'd throw on Scorpion or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But it hurts 10 times more listening to his music now, because I'm like, why? Like I don't I don't feel, it doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel
Mhm.
right. Like who is this music point towards, Drake? Who is this music actually directed to?
Oh man, yeah. Getting into Drake, I will give him his props, because I'll never forget. If you're reading this, it's too late, or I forget what his first like major album that he dropped was.
Was it Take Care?
It was before Take Care. It
Before
was
Take
it was
Care.
like the black with like the white lettering that was like falling down.
I think that So Far Gone.
So Far Gone.
Hmm.
That album, like the run, like I will never knock him for the run that he has been in a conversation of being part of the big three since I would say like 2008, 2009.
Yeah, he's held his own.
And at that time, I think the big three genuinely was from 2008 to 2013.
Hmm.
It was Wayne, Nicki, and Drake.
Yeah, it was.
Like those three, anytime one of their albums dropped, everyone was talking about it. Everyone was listening. It was always insane.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I personally kind of really have this weird relationship with Drake.
Mhm.
Or 2015, I would say, because
Mhm.
if you're reading this, it's too late. And What a Time to Be Alive came out 2015.
Yeah.
But like 2016 on, while he still really like changed his genre and did so many different things with the accents and the different mediums and stuff, it's just hard, I think, being used to that adjustment, because like you go from like
He started acting tough.
what is the song? HYFR? Hell yeah,
Hell,
fucking
you're
right.
fucking right.
Where
Yeah.
it's like all my exes live in Texas like I'm George Strait, or they go to Georgia State where tuition is handled by some random nigga that live in Atlanta. Like that she only see what you feel obligated. Admitted it to me the first time we dated, but she was no angel and we never waited to.
Damn.
I want to meet your padre. To meet your padre. It's a hard transition for me.
Hey, my
For me
respects to
personally,
your
I'm like,
padre.
man, like I never cared about like, I mean, I do care if you say you're the best and you have ghostwriters, but like personally, like looking back at that time, I know Drake at least did have somewhat of a pen,
Mhm.
because he was also writing for other people.
He
And
was
so it's like to go from just that run he was on to where he is
this
now.
now. It's
It just hurts. And
Yes.
that's why this channel will judge him.
oh, most definitely, most definitely. But the run he went on was insane, and also like you said, like Lil Wayne, him, and Nicki, like
There was no one that could touch them.
There was no one that can touch them, and they were all really. The thing is, they were all really close. Unlike
Mhm.
the big three now, I don't know if it's still the same big three. That
Yeah.
could be another conversation. But
Mhm.
Cole, Kendrick, and Drake, like now they probably all don't fuck with each other. You know, like
It just seems
maybe
so
Cole.
weird.
Cole's like, guys, stop fighting.
Yeah, that's really what it feels like. Is like he's just like he
wanted
from
what
what I gathered from all of it, he never wanted to drop 7-minute drill. It
Mhm.
was a lot of people like in his inner circle that kind of like were pressuring him, like, "Hey man, you gotta respond. You
Yeah.
gotta respond." And he's like, "Kendrick's my boy, though." Like,
yeah.
if you're the type of person to slap P Diddy, like if I slap P Diddy for you,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to like. come
Yeah,
at
like
you
why
and,
would I
get
go
upset.
at you? Like
Especially like, oh my goodness, what was that one song he had done where it was I think that was on the off season where he was like, my last scrap was with Puff Daddy.
oh, let
who
go of
would've
my
thought it?"
hand.
Yeah.
That's another album that really shaped
Oh,
me.
man.
Gosh.
Ah.
That's the first ever concert I truly went to. Is the
Ooh.
off season concert.
I was
Oh
supposed
my
to go to the
gosh.
off season concert. I literally had a ticket for I think it was Oakland.
Oakland.
And I ended up, it was the way it timed out was it was supposed to be me and my friend were gonna fly out there, but I also was flying out to Florida for like the week before the concert. So I literally had a flight from Florida to Seattle to Oakland. And then as I landed in Seattle, me and my friend had talked, and my friend couldn't make it, and so then I was like, I ultimately just sold my ticket and like changed my flight.
I just feel like that was the perfect concert, you know. It was just you had everybody. You had, you had J. Cole, obviously it was his show, but you also had 21 doing this thing, and it was like it's crazy because I've seen 21 twice now. But you also had Morey there, and they all did their thing in that last song. But the weirdest thing that I thought was like, why the hell was Drewski there? Like, it was back whenever he was first starting too, because I know he would he popped out like probably about 2019, and then I just remember just like, why the fuck is Drewski opening? But I just got it was a great first concert. I'll say that.
I think that one was so interesting because it did the exact opposite of what KOD did as far as reception,
Mhm.
where a lot of the regular Cole fans that loved KOD so much and loved his concept albums were like, I'm really not feeling this one. And then a lot of the people who were like way bigger on his pre 2014 days were like, that's what we needed, Cole. Thank you. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to the first episode. As I said, this one's a lot more casual conversation, but we'll be getting into more recent news and stuff in future episodes, and they'll be dropping every Friday. We'll probably do noon Mountain Standard Time. So for those in the East Coast, it's about 2 p.m. If you're on PST, that's 11 a.m. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and hope you guys tune in.
Thank you guys.
Turn off the lights, I'm in love with the dark, cause it's somebody get real dangerous. 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 It's somebody get